Happy Thursday morning. Welcome back. Today is June 5th, all day long. And we're glad to have Eduardo back. He was on a trip last week. He got to go around. He'll have to maybe, unless it was personal, we don't have to, if it was a business trip, but he did say that we were going to discuss, they were going to update the Safrina production outlook. So I thought we'd just dive right in because there's so much to talk about. And so with Eduardo back and all that we, are wondering when it comes to Safrina production and what that will mean. I'm excited just to hear an update on all that is happening in Brazil, what you are seeing, for movement and the production outlook. Last time we had talked, you were sitting right around a 132-ish for the crop, total corn crop out of Brazil. Has that number changed in the last couple of weeks here?
Oh, yes. First of all, it was a trip, a business trip. I was drinking a good wine in Argentina.
Nice, nice. Nick's gonna be mad he didn't get
Mendoza.
the invite next time. So
I was
Okay,
in
back
Mendoza
to
last week
the
too.
corn, which is much more boring than wine in Argentina. Oh yes, all tradings they are revising up their estimates for the whole crop around. It was 125, 110, 28. Now it's 133 up to 140. So the consequences, the outcome is we have to export more corn, maybe 45 million tons. So it's 1 month more in terms of comparing to the last year. It was 38 million tons. So roughly 1 month more could be we may see an increase October, November, December, and maybe January. Then then that's it. And Brazil is competing with the US, but big surprise today, the Cocopia, which is a South Korea company, booked one corn vessel from the US for late September, which is a big surprise because it was very cheap. Brazil, the best offer from Brazil, $244 per ton for this window, and then the PNW offered 238.4 per ton, which is the lowest flat price negotiated traded this year. Very cheap, very aggressive.
that is
I
really,
don't know
really aggressive for last
how
half
I don't know
September.
how the West could can is able to sell at this price. Maybe rail discount could be, but it's very aggressive.
Eduardo, is some of that from the exchange rate between the real and the dollar? That the where the US is being more, is it the price of the corn, or is it more of the exchange rate? Because we're seeing our soybeans dip below Brazil's this morning as well.
Yes, yes, yeah. For corn, we are at the same level of the last week in the flat price. But for sure for beans, it's very different. 30 cents higher. Yes, the FX is playing the role to get Brazil more expensive. That's the idea. But for corn, we have a lot of corn, and farmer selling is a third of the safrinha, so it's very lagging in terms of historical, not compared to the last year, but the other years that should be 40%. So um, and producers they are selling. The flat price is not so good, but they are selling.
What
Okay.
is the, just real quick on the Safrina talking about farmer selling and their need to sell and, some of the conversation that you'd kind of just maybe a mismatch, when it comes to what the willingness of selling is, or maybe the outlook for storage. I know last year there was a record large amount of silo bags imported. Are you seeing a similar trend this year? Do you think that, with all of the volatility in the currencies that we're seeing, with all the uncertainty, the idea that the US, I mean, the overreaching theme in the global market is that the US is going to screw up its ability to trade with the world, and that's going to benefit Brazil. So as a Brazilian farmer, you would probably have some optimism, I would imagine. Are they able to keep some of the crop out of the pipeline more that might surprise the market, or do you think you're going to see a solid flow of grain there?
Oh, for sure, the effects is I think it's the most important thing to keep Brazil competitive, and for sure the willing if farmers they will keep selling at this comparing to the prior month low flat price 20%, 15 up to 20%. But something's different this crop. I think it's cash and the cost of money.
It makes
And then you asked about the silos bag. It's big as the last year. The peak of the importation was in February, so March was lower compared to the last year, and April lower to I don't know, but could be Brazilian farmers. They are not so confident. A lot of corn, and the cost of money and the credit. The credit is getting very short in Brazil and very expensive. Banks are very um, they are afraid of another year with a lot of bankruptcy, as we have seen in the last 2 years. So I think so. Brazilian producers in Mato Grosso and Goiás, they are more willing to sell corn and whole beans, maybe.
interesting. Um, I was gonna ask a question, now I lost it.
I
So
think,
that's
or,
Nick looks like he's got one. I'll let
no,
him.
one thing I think is like the currency impact is that, in the past, a lot of times we've had strong currencies in South America when there's been large investment flows.
Hmm.
And so, everybody has been investing and the currency gets very strong. And it's usually when commodity prices are quite high. There's a lot of speculative interest in soybeans. This time it's going to be quite different. I think pretty much every week we write, about just the weaker dollar.
Hmm.
And that is kind of just one of the natural responses to this administration's playbook of weakening the dollar is going to be, because I think like, a lot of people are looking at Matif and seeing the same thing without, a stronger euro here. And, why can these specs keep selling Matif wheat? And, and we're seeing the same thing in Argentina. So it's just something to, I think that's the beginning of it. This time is different in the sense that the currency is going to do a lot of the work.
It'll be interesting to see because the administration has quietly said, I mean, there's been conversations that is part of the trade negotiation is currency fixing. I'll say fixing for, just because. Now, the administration denies it. A lot of other folks have said, no, 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 we're not going to. But there was a lot of talk leading up to the G7 that was going to be a focus of that the gathering of the G7 finance ministers, that was going to be a focus, like discussing on what we do to keep that pressure on the dollar to help offset some of the or help it helps make America a better exporter. If you want to build American manufacturing, you have to have to a certain extent, you have to have the currency under pressure, but it also helps to cheapen commodities to a certain, like, I was thinking about this earlier. Everyone keeps focusing on how cheap Russia's wheat is and how that's a sign of limited demand. But meanwhile, the US has the largest export book on for new crop in 12 years. That's an indication into, or to me, a sign of probably how cheap the currency is and what that means for our wheat globally. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so with Russia, we commented a couple weeks ago about like the inflation became their enemy. So they don't have the luxury of the US where even when inflation is your enemy, you can kind of work with your currency. They have to strengthen that ruble and they have it. So, aside from that and also just needing income. So, inflation's become a big problem in Russia. So you're seeing a stronger ruble as a policy. And again, I think if you said, is there a golden bullet to a golden ticket to what this administration wants to do. A 30% weaker dollar over 36 months would do it. I mean, it's what solves it. So I think you just have to keep in the back of your mind that what they say might be one thing, but ultimately they are going to
They're doing
weaken.
is the other. Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing it.
Back to Brazil, just real
Mhm.
quick. One of the things, talking about the farmer and the credit and the situation there, what would you say farmer sentiment is? Because I would say in the US, it's pretty poor. In Brazil, optimistic, pessimistic, somewhere in the middle, status quo. I mean, where would you put farmer sentiment currently in your travels?
In Brazil, yeah, the sentiment, yeah, they say it's not good, but they do the opposite.
They keep going, right?
They
So
keep
it's always the
increasing.
neighbor that's quitting too, by the way. It's not.
Yeah, yeah, they are very brave,
Yeah.
no question. But of course, they if we talk about the next year and then the elections, all the guys that I talked with, they expected a big change in terms of banks. They expected the same. So everybody in Brazil is in the same side of the boat. They want and they expected to see a big change in terms of fiscal responsibility and everything else. So, but based on what producers they are doing, it's the opposite. They are increasing the acreage, increasing investments. Market, it was dead market last year, but now this year it's increasing in terms of the herd, the size of the herd, and profitability is good. So it's like this. You one time and then you see people crying, then people, uh, putting money to work. Yeah, Brazil. We are not complaining too much, but I don't know if this is good or not. We
Do
should
you
complain more, maybe.
do you expect, have you seen any rulings on the Mato Grosso acreage, the that had been taken out of production, for deforestation? Have you seen any updates on that? Could there be an acreage increase coming for, more area for soybeans?
Yes, yes. The number is for the next year around 400,000 hectares. Only Mato Grosso. So for soybean, could be more switch cotton to soybean. It's possible because cotton prices went down and the basis in Brazil didn't went up to compensate the New York prices. But 400,000 hectares only Mato Grosso is possible, and the whole Brazil could be close to 1 million.
1 million hectares, so 2 billion acre, basically 2 million acre, just over 2 million acre, two and a half
Yeah,
million
it's
acre
very
increase.
rough estimate because we could see in the south of Brazil more corn, summer corn, 150 thousand hectares around that because not now, but 1 month ago, and then the summer crop corn, the profitability was better. Now I don't know, but it's possible. So, but the rough is the consensus is 700,000 hectare increase for the next year.
Interesting. Going back to corn exports really quick, one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit because I feel like maybe there is a bit of a misunderstanding to a certain extent about grain flows or logistics out of Brazil. Sometimes where I think folks think that Brazil, is going to continue to export soybeans as quickly as they have been, right? As in and we touched on it a little bit at the start that the U.S. has grown cheaper than Brazil. August into September, and obviously you're going to see that continue through the end of the calendar year into probably harvest again in Brazil, correct? I mean, your flow of beans into the export channels begins to slow. And so could you talk about that a little bit, how Brazil really, and I mean, honestly, the US does too, how we have export seasons. And so in Brazil, right, your corn's export season begins in July. you tend to see Brazilian corn exports last July, August, September through the end of the calendar year. A lot of times, like you said, maybe another month this year where we carry into January. But I just find it interesting how well it works where, US corn exports tend to shut off in August through the end of the year and soybean exports pick up, at the same time, from a seasonal standpoint, it fits. And so I want to talk about it a little bit just simply because you had mentioned that Brazil's export outlook could be as high as 45 million metric ton. It's about 2 million metric ton higher than the current US estimate. But when it comes down to it, will Brazil really cut into new crop corn exports out of the US, in your opinion, all things considered, or how much do you think it will cut into the US export book, all things considered?
Okay, for corn, it's possible because the 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 last year we haven't seen the P&W more competitive than all the other corridors. So if the US keep flowing corn through P&W and soybean through Gulf, and then maybe we have the both export programs running together. I don't know, but last year we saw something like that. And if BMW keeps this same competitive as we saw today, the Cocopia purchase booked one corn better than Brazil's five to $6 per ton, and then I think the US could keep a a good rhythm during this O&D program window, competing with Brazil to Asia, which is a very important because Asia, you know, the big bulks are there, so Brazil will need to compete. But the difference this year, it's not only the effects, but how willing the exporters in Brazil they want to keep flowing corn, losing money, because in the last few years, because of the take or pays, they didn't have option. But this year they are very light in terms of commitment, which is very important uh, for to build the big program in Brazil. Big question if Brazil will push and sell more for August, September, and then last for October, November, December, or opposite. Opposite. I think October, November, December, Brazil will should be more competitive comparing to the West, including PNW, because after that, for example, January and Feb, we don't have a you know um, window to keep flowing corn and beans in the start of the harvest. So my opinion is Brazil should and maybe will be more competitive than Brazil than the West for corn, especially O&D, and then that could cut off the West program.
It'll,
Not good, not good
no,
for
it'll leave us
future.
something to watch. It'll give us something to be paying attention to for sure. It'll make that much more cash movements that much more important here, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think
Sorry.
that the most important is the size of July, August, and September. If this is big, much bigger than the last year, and then the pressure over the O&D will be lighter than the expected. But the opposite, then we have to export anyways.
Well, I think grain flows, watching basis, and all of that fun stuff's just, I mean, it's just getting started really out of Brazil versus the US, where everyone sits, how the currency affects everything, and what we continue to watch. Um,
Yeah. And then we can forget the Ukraine. It's much better than last
yes.
year. They had to sell. They sold very, I I think 10 vessels at maximum. So they had to sell, and Spain had to buy, and the preference will be the no GMO corn from Ukraine. So this year will be much more competitive than the last year. It's not easy game for the West.
No, it'll obviously production will have a huge influence on how much the US needs from an export standpoint. Like we're not quite there yet, but it is something that everyone's watching, or at least I would say the market has baked in right now. I don't think you can throw a rock without hitting an analyst that's saying that exports are overstated by 2 to 300 million bushels. So it'll be interesting to see how the year plays out and what the US does to remain competitive. Moving over to the global front or the northern hemisphere to a certain extent here, Nick, let's talk a little bit about weather and what we're seeing. There's been a lot of conversation about China again. We're starting to see corn prices creep up just a little bit. And some talk of potential production reductions. But I know in your write up here this morning, right? It was like, okay, let's pump the brakes on that. We're a bit away from really kind of saying that the crop has been majorly impacted or whatever. We are hearing that wheat, to a certain extent, has been problematic in spots where irrigation hasn't been great, but those are those reports have been somewhat minimal. Let's start with China weather and kind of like we did last week, move our way across, go to the Black Sea and then Europe and to the US. And what are you seeing? Anything out there that we think we should be paying attention to?
I mean, China, one of the things I just pulled up was looking at was, Henan was actually warmer on average, like the last 4 weeks a year ago. Areas like Anhui and Shandong were actually drier. So again, the weather this year looks like for wheat, it was just this kind of penetrating heat that probably did a bit more damage. But again, like this acreage, if you look, most of the areas are going to get rain. And there's a kind of northern Inner Mongolia that will continue to miss, but in general, I mean, there just isn't a big problem right now, other than it's been hot and it stays hot. But I think that damage is done. So and we've kind of said I think we've caught a couple million tons on corn just because you've probably lost 3 to 5% of potential planted, but that can easily be made up if weather's good. So again, it is just too early to signal there's any type of problem and China will still be the last place that will know anything for anytime soon. And they have a lot of stocks from last year to rotate through.
They do.
So they have a buffer.
Yeah, they from a wheat standpoint, they have more in the way of wheat to carry forward. Their wheat price has been set lower than corn for now too. So you've got, some worry that you could see wheat continue to work its way or begin to work its way more into the feed rations there for sure. What are we seeing in the Black Sea? It's always nice to, we've had some rabble rousing about state of emergencies and things like that, obviously. But when you look at cash, Russia doesn't seem to be too awful worried about their production outlook. Um, any thoughts there? The wind wasn't overly damaging, right? They've been a little bit drier, but Ukraine's starting out a bit better. What are you seeing there? Anything that you're watching closely there into Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I think like in general, it's just a nothing burger as a whole. You have some pockets that kind of where it's been dry and the winds were, Sukhoi winds were concerned. It didn't get very hot, so they're just not going to do much damage. But it has been dry in that like Krasnodar or Rostov Southwest area. So, I keep an eye on that. It's certainly not great for any type of real big upside surprises. But in general, it's a lot of the northern or central Russia is getting a lot of rain, and even the eastern Russia, little things you'll actually have soybeans, and so I don't see any type of problem there unless that dryness in the southwest really kind of stays concentrated and then expands. Um, and again, like farmers aren't going to want to sell if the ruble strong, that's going to be problematic. The prices just aren't going to be very good. So that's kind of another factor. You go over to Ukraine and, there's like lots of anecdotal reports of these frosts and these, dead wheat fields involved. But in general, it looks like the conditions are much better than, 60 days ago. And I don't, see any sort of, we're not far enough along to say there's going to be a corn problem of any sort. And, forecast kind of dries out for 2 days and then there's rains coming in again. So.
I did want to make a point real quick on when you'd mentioned about Russia or talking about Russia, and slower farmer selling and some of the negative prices that we've seen. We did see, was it Mercer, the new Egypt buying group, come out and say, that they are working to basically kind of spread out their, basket of suppliers. You've seen them book some French wheat, some Romanian wheat, and some other purchases, which was not unusual. But when the war happened and Russia got exceptionally cheap, Egypt started making a lot of purchases out of Russia, and a lot of them were kind of behind the scenes or backdoor deals that were unusual, and has been part of why you've had such a struggle in the wheat market to a certain extent, because we've lost the transparency that came with a lot of those GASC tenders. And so I just think it's interesting to note that I think we could see more conversation about cheap Russian wheat. But I don't know if I don't know that if the geopolitical risk that could come with folks decide, and I don't think the U.S. has the guts to do it. But if Graham's bill gets pushed forward, if Russia's retaliation to Ukraine's drone strike over the weekend crosses a line, I think you could see some interesting developments happen that could limit Russia's ability to ship into the market. I'm not going to say that's a likelihood, but it is something that I would be watching, somewhat closely, because you have heard of world end users kind of talk about looking in a different direction than Russian supplies after them, with them being one of the largest suppliers. But anyway, just a thought that I kind of had. Go ahead.
Well, and keep an eye too. No, I mean, it's a good thought. And, nobody's been willing to restrict it yet. But Turkey's another one who's drawn down a lot of stocks, and they've used their position they used their position the first time around to build up a lot of stocks. So, if you see them look anywhere else but Russia, that would probably be a good indicator that, that attitude may be changing fast.
It'll be interesting. Just another thing to watch.
And
Go
what
ahead,
about
Eduardo.
Canada? The weather there.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. Let's go to North America, because the US is okay, but we're kind of sandwiched between some interesting. We've got the prairies in Canada, and we've got Mexico. You mentioned in your write-up Mexico this morning. So yeah,
Yeah.
have at it.
Yeah, Mexico, I mean, they just haven't got any rain, but they don't get much. And it just is kind of concentrated in that corn wheat area. So I think it's not so much a big change on what Mexico is going to produce. It's just that they're going to continue to be a bid in the US market. Yeah, so I mean, if you look at Alberta has, the fires up there, I think we're going to put something out. I think it'll be the second worst year for fires to start the first 5 months of the year, like on record, and led by Canada. So in Alberta's going through fires again. They're not as bad as 23 yet, not as widespread. And I was just looking a little bit. I think it hasn't been as hot. That heat has stayed over in Saskatchewan and actually east and northern Ontario, where nothing grows, but it is getting warmer. So, and we haven't had one of those big dry setups yet, but it's been drier than normal. So I do think it's worth watching. You're kind of on the fringe, but we're not in the realm of a problem yet, but we're not far. And a lot of the headlines, I think, are more around the fires, and some of this aren't quite ag problems yet. And again, it hasn't been hot on it yet. It's just starting to. So it's only June 5th. But if this were to kind of shift over west, it could turn people's heads pretty quick. And we had made the comment a week ago that just kind of what's going on in France, and sort of, you got some wheat and, Western France, a little rapeseed, corn, just an area that's just kind of keeps staying dry. And, Canada would be another one kind of similar to watch.
The heat, I'm not making you be a weatherman by any means, but the models are definitely indicating that the heat will build in across the prairies and across much of the US here, in the middle of June as we move forward. I guess we'll see how well they do, though. I'm not holding
Yeah, I think it's
on
like after the
based on
13th,
performance.
but a lot of like that forward GFS that they're all talking about on the dryness is totally unreliable. The Euro doesn't have it. So even think you're still forecast to get, in You know, it's kind of Iowa, northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin will still dry out, but the rest of it is, so I don't, I
It'll
wouldn't
be interesting. Yeah,
want, I wouldn't want to front run a US weather problem
no,
here on an unreliable 2 week
on
out
June
model.
5th either.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
it's
ahead,
just,
Eduardo.
Hey, Carl, about the acreage. The last time you called for 1 million acres less for corn. What do you think? Does the rough of the idea keep the same?
Um, yeah. Okay, so as of Sunday night, according to USDA figures, we had for the United States 6.7 million acres of corn and 13.4 million acres of soybeans to plant. A lot of those corn acres today is their final plant date for insurance. Now, I'm not saying they won't get planted, but you take Ohio, they still had 1.2 million acres of corn to plant, just their corn. We've heard of guys swapping out corn seed for soybeans. My thought is, I think you have to take that planted number, and I think we're focusing pretty heavy on what needs to be planted. But I think you're going to find a lot of that corn that was planted in the east. There's going to be some issues with it. The stands are not very uniform. For the last few years, that's been one thing with the U.S. corn crop is it's been very uniform. It's been very steady. This year, we're not seeing that. We didn't see even we're not seeing even stands where it comes up. Um, Yesterday, I do a weekly radio show in North Dakota. Um, they've been just saturated up there, rain after rain after rain, and they can't catch a break. And not only is the concern that you can't get the crop in, but up there they're worried about they've lost their nitrogen that they had in. You're getting to the point now where you're getting nutrients leaching out because of this perpetual rainfall. Um, I'm still in the camp, my opinion, we see corn acres probably come in 2 to 2.5 million under what the USDA is talking right now.
To
That's my opinion. But the harvested
and for
acres,
soybean, a little
what
bit
would,
higher
yeah.
than that or the same?
soybeans, you can plant them up until the 4th of July and even past that. So I wouldn't touch soybeans right now. I think we see, the old thing, we'll see a few more acres probably go in from corn. But at the end of the day, I don't think we see a huge increase in soybean acres this year. I just really don't. Because guys are looking at it and they look at the futures and that, you're not going to force in 445 corn and $10.30 soybeans when you can get a check.
Yeah. Okay.
If the input for the crop wasn't so high right now, you look at nitrogen values, you look at your input costs, and it just the case is there to really lean towards that insurance payment this year.
I'm a
So
little, I
question.
think the one caveat in that is the good conditions in the Western Belt. I don't know. There's been a lot of talk that you saw a big expansion in like Iowa and parts of Nebraska and things like that. To me, I think that might offset some of the loss that Carl's expecting. I'm more of a 94.5 than a 95.3 planted acre kind of gal, but I think the conversation, is going to start to come up more here as we move through the month for sure. Of course, with the number at the end of the month too. So, yeah, go ahead,
So
Nick.
real quick, I was just gonna, what do you think the farmer sentiment overall? Because like the Purdue had come out and said that the like farmer sentiment was really positive, and I can't, that's not the feeling I
Um,
I
get.
I wanted to be like, did they actually poll farmers? Because the folks I'm talking to, This is probably one of the hardest stretches of time that I mean, even with the opportunity at $5 corn, basically what was going on is $5 corn was helping to offset 9.50 bean losses. And so even when things were good on one side, they were bad on the other. Banks have started to do things I feel that are predatory to a certain extent. Not all banks, but I think it's getting harder and harder out there for folks. I mean, there's stories of acres that are going unplanted. Carl's got a couple anecdotal stories from out that way. I know of more than one grower I don't want to say locally by any means, but that is in the region, more than one that has found out at the last minute basically that they've done all they can to get the crop in, but they aren't going to have an operating note to continue the year, or they may struggle to find an operating note to continue. I'm going to say that's a big minority. I'm not going to say like that's happening everywhere. But if you see this market continue on the path that it's on, and you don't see price improvement, it's likely to spread like wildfire. I feel like the sentiment's pretty poor.
I don't know if Angie, I don't know if we talked about this in Sarasota County, Iowa. Um, Prime farm ground in Iowa. You're not gonna find better farm ground. And the day before Memorial Day, a tenant called up the landlord and said, I can't, 1,000 acres, I can't get my financing. I'm not gonna be able to rent them. So a landlord is scrambling to find people to plant 1,000 acres of farm ground. And the guys are coming in and they're saying, look, we'll give you $200 an acre cash rent to take it off your hands, because we go out and buy inputs and you look at the futures, you are not going to go out and spend $350 an acre on cash rent on, June 4th to take land that you weren't planning on farming and have nothing marketed for. So I would not put any more credit into that Purdue report than the paper it was written on.
No, that makes sense. Real quick, while we were sitting here, Angie, I just pulled up, so like our Iowa, like Iowa, the next 2 weeks here, it's
Yeah.
showing 47 millimeters, and this is like a blended Euro leaning forecast. So again, like I just can't get at all excited. Now I pulled up Saskatchewan just because you really usually don't get a Canada problem without a Saskatchewan problem.
Yeah.
And they've got over almost 40 millimeters. Now keep in mind most of that's in like the between the 16th and the 18th. So he is not very reliable. But again, just uh, you know, I think with enough forecasts we can all find one that
That fits our bias. Yay.
that just
Love it.
it's good. There's a problem. So, and again, there's no heat. So
Yeah.
I don't know how you're gonna do real damage in early June without heat.
No, I don't think you can do real damage in early June in general.
In general, yes.
I mean, let's be honest. And so it'll be interesting to watch. The National Weather Service has a couple different potential major issues. Extreme heat is potential in their little warning map of the 14th through the 18th, but the 10th through the 14th, there's a big risk of extreme rainfall in the same area. And so if you get really, really heavy rain, and then it gets really, really hot, I mean, it's obviously not great for the areas that are underwater, but let's be honest, when it comes to rain, for every acre that's underwater, there's 2 acres that are probably doing well. At least that's what the market's going to think. So we'll watch it.
And even like I saw some guys talking about how like, oh, if we get more rain in Texas, it'll be drought breaking. Like last 4 weeks we're showing you've averaged 3 inches, in like in Western Texas. Last year that was a little more. It was, 3.5 inches, and they did 100 bushel wheat in
Yeah.
areas.
I
So I just don't I
I
don't
always
see
think
it.
it's weird when people want to insist that a drought needs to be broken. You don't have to break a drought if you get consistent, measurable rain. Like you don't have to have an excessive amount of rain to offset a deficit to produce a crop. Like I always get when people are like, we have to break the drought. Well, I mean, you really want to? I don't know. But let's kind of in that sort of vein here, we've got a few minutes left or just a little bit left. Let's go around the horn like we always do, and kind of leave it with things that you're watching this week or thoughts that you want to share with the class, I'll say, ahead of the week here. Eduardo, I'll let you start. Not to put you on the spot, but I'll let you start.
Yeah, look into the cash market for corn, and then I think it's important to keep an eye on the South Korea purchases. We have more 10 cargoes at around that for the next couple of weeks, and then the flood price is very low. And today it was a very big surprise, but it was PNW, and don't know how this is possible to, if it's possible to keep the same flat price, which is for originate in the US. I think it's cheap. Depends on the rail fare. And then last year, I remember the rail companies in the US give some discount, but then back to the normal, and then that's over. The US got more expensive. So I think the South Korea is a good indicator for us to see the competitiveness through the regions. Ukraine didn't show in this four tenders that we had today, which is maybe probably because of the war. It's very likely because of the freights and whatever. So the companies are not willing to take this risk. And South Korea, it's one of the most sensitive for this kind of risk. So it was only Brazil and the US, and the US sold at a very competitive price, flat price. So, in my opinion, this is a very good to keep a look on this. If the US is able to keep flowing the corn through PNW at this level, uh, which is going to be a good for CBOT, but very bad for Brazil.
Interesting. Definitely something to pay attention to. We keep arguing amongst the folks, some other traders that I talk to about what do you pay attention to? Because spreads say one thing, we look at balance sheets and this, that, and the other thing. And I keep saying the only thing that matters anymore are grain flows, logistics, and basically, how who is what, currency obviously has an impact on
Yes,
competitiveness, but your grain flows, your logistics, and who is able to offer what and execute.
yes, that's the point.
So, Carl will want to go head your direction next. We'll go
Okay,
alphabetically. Look at me.
on the on the grains, obviously, I'm watching right now. I want to pay a little closer attention to our new crop export sales. We're getting to the time of the year where we do tend to see, especially China, start laying in some new crop coverage. If our soybeans, our exchange rate is favorable, our soybeans are cheaper than Brazil. China has no soybeans on the books with us. I would expect to see business from them in the next week or so. If we don't, I would start to maybe get a little bit nervous there about what we're going to see for coverage. But at the same time, we have shifted back to a hand to mouth buying market. So, I mean, we got to take that with a grain of salt. On the livestock side, um, cattle values ridiculously high and extending them gains today. October cattle putting in new contract highs. Hogs put in new contract highs yesterday. Feeder cattle up over $3 here this morning, and we got live sales at the auction coming in $8 to $10 higher. If you don't like the price on your cattle today, just wait and you can sell them tomorrow for more is about where that market's going. Starting to cut into our feedlot placements though. The southern US feeder market, and there's lots down in Texas, over in New Mexico, Arizona sitting empty. One reason for water, they're struggling to get water in for the cattle. But we also have that ban on feeders coming out of Mexico, and that's starting to put some risk premium into that livestock market. And the final thing in livestock, you have a consumer that just isn't backing off on their red meat demand. And so, I mean, we're still in a perfect storm there for higher values, but we're getting to the point where packers are starting to push back a little bit. So, in a nutshell, that's what I'm watching.
Nick?
Yeah, just a
Oh, yeah,
point.
Eduardo. Yeah.
The US started to sell something, soybean, in the second week of June last year. So it was four vessels sold. Then it's very important. So that should be the start. If not, as you said, well, that would be something bearish.
I I will say caveat wise in this, just to if we do, because we did while we've been on the call, Trump posted on his True Social website that they had the conversation, he and Xi, and that it went very well, discussing the intricacies of the deals that they've made. The respective teams are going to be meeting shortly, yada, 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 yada. The one thing I would say is that China could easily kind of hold, like, and I guess not your government, maybe your private crushers wouldn't be influenced by this, but it would not surprise me to see him kind of hold off as a carrot stick, you know what I mean? Sort of. I would not get too shook up about a delay in sales at this point, if as long as trade negotiations are taking place, because China has said, or the sources are saying that that would be one of the things that China would offer. And so obviously kind of giving yourself, like if you're just letting your hole grow, like it's a natural hole in your supply already, then you would already plan on making those purchases. But if it happens as, oh, look at this goodwill purchase that I made, I do feel like there could be some psychological or, some other factors that could influence the trade, just as my sort of, caveat to all of it. But I agree that it is something we'll want to watch.
Yep. I mean, that's similar to what Javier was reporting in Argentina here, with the US getting more of Vietnam's meal business, potentially displacing up to million and a quarter of Argentina normal routine, which could end up being bearish if Argentina's got, significantly more, meal to offer without a home. Down here, farmer selling was very good last few weeks, 500,000 tons a day, with about half of that being priced. A lot of that won't be delivered. Logistics just remain a big challenge. Kind of the story of this year was, really kind of concerning weather, last half to East January, and then, a break in that in early Feb, and really good weather. And so, these headlines about the floods, sure, lost a couple 100,000 tons, but, the real impact is just a delay in harvest, but overall, like a very good finish to the campaign. And now, we're looking at about 25 days until these, reductions in taxes go away. So you'll see a lot of farmer movement. You're going to see the domestic prices get really weak. I think corn's, 12, $15 off, recent highs. And you'll continue to see pressure as these farmers try to take advantage, expecting that after June 30th, these taxes go back up. Um, not again, fundamentally and weather-wise, I am not bullish. They're just, the people are going to try to create a story, but until we have one, I think grain is very weather dependent at the moment. I would just, one thing I mentioned, we're going to watch soybeans especially close here, just from the standpoint of the China narrative. There has been a lot of South American farmers selling and pricing, and there has been a lot of specs willing to absorb that. And, Carl's points about the acreage are spot on. We just don't know what we're going to get, and if those farmers will actually switch to beans. So I do think, beans to me are the ones that may be the first to signal that there is a problem. And they'd also probably, from a macro perspective here, you've got, if this tax bill gets through and you do get this big kind of fiscal push, beans tend to be a little bit more of a favorite to, on the long, just on the inflation side. So I just keep an eye on beans here, what they.
I want to add something to that. Here's some food for thought for everybody. we can add 1 million soybean acres and still be in a rationing position on our new crop carryout in the US.
Soybeans could get spicy.
And they told you they don't like being down around $10. Like
No.
it's just that the cost of production, we get to that cost of production level. And oh, and one other thing I would say too is what Eduardo said a month ago, it's the same in Argentina, but probably even more so because it's all full season crops. If a farmer today had a choice, corn and beans, they're on the margin switching to corn. And that's just another one to keep in mind for southern Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, is that you would have corn being favored today, all things being equal, with taxes back at where they stand.
I love it so much because we'll see South America lean towards corn just in time for the US to lean towards beans the following year because they might get spicy. Who knows? It'll be fun. My little last thought that I'm leaving things with is if I were a physical trader in the Eastern Corn Belt, I would be a little nervous, and I would be looking to get some coverage on if you have coverage that you need to get on. I feel like there's been a lot of complacency in the industry driven by extremely aggressive farmer selling early in the year. I think it's been easy to source bushels up until about now. And we're now starting to see what could really be an interesting dynamic develop in this market structure as the commercial slash end user, especially the feeder, who has really nice margins currently. Like your hog feeders are looking at great margins. They don't really need to take tweezers to their ration to survive. They aren't really looking to replace corn. They don't really need to. But I think there are a lot of folks out there that thought that a recency bias influences merchandisers as well. And I think that there's this idea that grain is going to continue to flow into this pipeline with ease as we work our way into July, August, and September. If you're in the Eastern Corn Belt now, you just basically added 3 to 4 weeks to your old crop coverage needs, first off, because we have a delayed crop and we've had a really, really slow start. But you also, because we've had a delayed crop and a slow start, you are going to run into a farmer, if they have bushels still on hand, that isn't going to part with it very easily. If they've been able to wear through this market this far, there is only a few of them that are absolutely going to be forced to liquidate bushels until the end of August. And so to me, I would just be really careful that I see what the spread is saying. I see that the July, September is not bullish, but the market structure itself, the physical pipeline, to a certain extent, needs to incentivize holding forward at this point because I think we're recognizing that this market's going to be extremely tight as we get into July and beyond. And so this is one of the things I'll be watching. I want to see what happens in the Western Belt. I'll be watching that very, very closely. There's a lot of talk from commercials and folks that I've talked to out that way. And Carl's had similar conversations where the commercials basically liquidated a lot of their ownership, a lot of their holding. As a merchandiser, the market has told you to do that. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens here as these end users have a lot of time left to cover and may not have the bushels that they think are on hand. So I'll be watching basis really closely. It goes back to grain flow. Me personally, I think that we'll see a true indication of what's really in this market here, over the next 10 days to 2 weeks. I think things could get super spicy. We'll see what delivery brings, but I understand how the cash dynamics look. But I think that this market may be sending some false signals out there from an overall, just based on someone who's trying to cover a position here, and it's basically every single day basis in firms a nickel. Like it's just it's craziness. And everyone that thought they had a bunch of bushels that would be coming in are now finding that it's not the case. So we'll see. It'll eventually stop, but it's going to be pretty spicy here. So I'd be careful. I'd be careful putting too much stock in the performance of the front month spread as an indication of the overall supply and demand dynamics in the US. That's my too long didn't read version of my 5-minute thought there. So anyone want to add anything before we call it a week? Nah. All right. With that,
All
we'll
good.
call
Thank
it
you.
our Thursday. We'll be back next week. We'll know more. We'll know more and less. That's the best part about this gig is the more you know, the less you know as time goes on.
Yeah.
And so if you guys have any questions, reach out. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.
Okay, see you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.